Hi, so this is a new thing that I'm trying on the channel at the moment, which is basically um, whittering at the camera about whatever I'm currently thinking about while drinking a cup of coffee. Um, and that is basically the structural factor for the video. Um, there are things that I want to talk about in this. It's hopefully not going to be too digressive and too much of a ramble. But I wanted to start out by talking about a kind of weird synchronicity that came up in my life yesterday, which was that I found myself going to. I'm on the way to the Tyneside Cinema in Newcastle to see a screening of Peter Greenaway's 1989 film The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover. I was reading rumours on Twitter and Facebook that horrible Orwellian coinage, DEXU, the Department for Exiting the European Union, has apparently been planning to introduce food rationing in the event of us crashing out of Europe, hard Brexit, no deal, all that. So that was interesting because because The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover is partly a film which is about food. I would say that it's about what Francis Bacon referred to as the peculiar beauty of meat. But it's actually about the beauty of other foods as well. Bread, profiteroles, fowl of many descriptions. If you think of still life paintings, Northern Renaissance still lives, that's very much one of the feelings that Greenaway is going for in the film. There's also the fact that food is fairly central to the plot. It's a film set in a restaurant. There is constant interaction between the restaurant and the kitchen, and indeed the outside of the restaurant, and indeed the bathrooms, but we'll get to those. But food is also central to the actual plot. A number of key plot points involve food in some way. So I'm going to see this film, which I didn't know until that morning was on. It was a special showing as part of a season they have at the Tyneside, accompanying a new film called The Party. And at the same time that I'm going to this film that is really, really about food, I'm also, which as you can probably tell, I kind of like. At the same time as I'm doing that, I'm reading people talking about the reintroduction of rationing, which is weird. Partly, as I say, because of the food thing, but also because of the fact that in a lot of ways, I actually think The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover is a film which it's very definitely a political film. Greenaway saw it as a response to the Thatcher period, and what he felt was a kind of coarsening of society that was going on at the time. That's my reading of it. I'm assuming that's the comment he wants to make. I could be wildly wrong. There was a guy next to me at the cinema when I saw it who seemed to find all Albert Speaker, the Michael Gambon character's behaviour, which we'll get to in a moment, hilarious. Which does in itself make you think. But it actually, and this is one of those cliches that people always come out with, and probably more in here than anywhere else. But, it has a lot to say to us about the political moment in which we find ourselves. And it does, as cliched and cheesy as that sounds. Because of a concept that I'm going to call the puerility of evil. Obviously riffing there on Hannah Arendt's idea of the banality of evil. In response to her coverage of the Holocaust and the Eichmann trial, and just the general trend of her moral philosophy anyway. Of course, Banality of Evil is one of the key books that Arendt wrote, and it basically is based on the idea that evil isn't some kind of big monolithic evil. It's not demonic. The Nazis, as much as it would be convenient for us to think this, weren't supernatural things. They were humans. They were people like us who found themselves seduced by a dangerous idea, which destroyed them and destroyed their systems, and in many cases destroyed their lives and futures. The puerility of evil is like the banality of evil, but I'm talking about the concept of puerility, which means childish, but it has a connotation of not innocent childishness. Puerility, if you describe something as puerile, it's childish in the same sense that going through the Bible, drawing big penises on all the pictures of Jesus and laughing about it is childish. It's snickering and petulant and self-interested and attention-seeking and kind of trashy. And this is embodied in the film by Albert Speaker, who's Michael Gambon's character, who plays a gangster, the thief of the title, who owns, or at least is extorting protection money from Richard, the cook of the film's title. The story basically follows his wife having an affair with her lover, who he then kills, and I'm not going to spoil it for you in this. I mean, it's a film from 1989. There are other videos on here that will tell you what happens in the end, so I'm going to adopt the sort of modest approach of not doing that. It's a revenge's tragedy, basically, a classic sort of restoration art form. Now, the crucial thing that I want to talk about is the similarity between Albert Speaker, Michael Gambon's character, and a certain other political figure, who I'll not name, again, for the same kind of faux modesty that forbids me to tell you what the end of The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover is, but see if you can maybe guess who I have in mind when I'm talking about this. So, Albert Speaker is a large, balding, classless, aggressive, surly, ignorant, pretentious, self-interested, misogynistic. He's Trump, basically. That's his character. And it's one of the things that's really, really obvious about it is, well, it's not obvious about the film, but when, when I actually was reacting to the events of last year, to the election, if you can call it an election, but that's a discussion for another video. One of the first films I actually watched to cope with that result was this film, and I was really struck. I wanted to watch it because I had not seen it in a while, and I remember that it felt like an appropriate film because it's a film in which a sort of tyrannical gangster character gets their comeuppance. But what I'd forgotten was the kind of febrile undercurrent of Speaker's psyche and sexuality. One of the things that, again, is kind of a spoiler, that I'm not going to go into, there's a very, very affecting scene with Helen Mirren where she describes basically the ways in which she has been abused by Albert. And the thing that really strikes you about them, and the thing that strikes you about Albert's behaviour a lot during the film, is how infantile the abuses are. They are abuses that involve toy trains. Albert himself as a character has a very puerile, immature fascination with bodily processes, particularly those of women. And in that context, you might think, for example, about that thing Trump said about Megyn Kelly, and the way he often, almost immediately, reduces women to their genitals and to the biological processes associated with them. And there's another thing that's very similar about Albert Speaker as well, which is he has a very strong sense of what people call amour propre, which means self-love, but not in the physical sense. I've just been talking about someone having an unhealthy fascination with bodily processes, and I just made a wanking joke. That's great. I am part of the problem. No, but yes. But in the sense of a kind of a self-esteem that is easily wounded, that isn't stable, a pamperedness, a cossetedness, a tendency to fly off the handle when faced with what are really minor obstacles or minor criticisms. That, again, is a feature of his character. This very massively wounded self-love and a sense of wounded innocence, because one of the key scenes in the film is a scene where a Speaker attacks a young choir boy who's one of the kitchen staff. Again, this is a Peter Greenaway film. In Peter Greenaway films, the kid who washes the dishes in the kitchen is also a boy soprano. Everyone looks like a character in a Rembrandt painting. Usually there are weird numbers, there are sort of inset screens, and usually something really weird happens to a dead body or a number of dead bodies. Greenaway is really interesting, actually. The body horror elements to some of what he does, not supernatural elements, but oh god, I'm sorry about that. That's not very that's very good, is it? But actually natural elements. People in his films behave often like characters in fairy tales, and I mean, Jonathan Meades referred to Stalin in Joe Building, his documentary about the architecture of the Soviet Union under Stalinism, he referred to Stalin as a creature of terrible fairy tale, which I think is something that could fit both Trump and also Albert Speaker in this film. You know, there's a grotesqueness to them. They are in a very real way grotesque. Speaker is a very grotesque character. And one of the hallmarks of the grotesque is the joining together of an element that is almost beautiful with an element that is very base and very, very ugly. And in the case of Speaker, the thing that's beautiful is in moments when he loses it, he sometimes reverts to a narrative of his own wounded innocence. And I think it's clear from that, and this is where we obviously, you know, for fear of breaking the Goldwater rule, we have to be very clear here. This is Speaker I'm talking about, obviously. I think Speaker is a child abuse victim. I think he has been abused by someone in the past because he has these scenes where he talks about, you know, his wounded innocence. In his narrative, he is the party who has been wronged, even as he wrongs other people, and he does a lot in the course of the film. He is always the aggrieved party. Any act of aggression he engages in partly is about a sort of alpha show of dominance, but you actually kind of start to realize as you watch the film actually that he's kind of washed up. You know, that's the secret. He's at the end of his powers. He's the lion in winter. You know, he's coming to the end of his period, and he can't see this because he's so conceited. But the entire time, he, on some level, does know. On some level, he's aware of, you know, where he's going, where he's plateaued, and where he's going to go now. And again, we're talking about Speaker, obviously. He's aware of his decline, and he is always reacting to perceived insults. Even a character reading while eating, he can only view as a kind of dig, a kind of jab at his own intelligence. He doesn't like being corrected. There are moments in the film where he, you know, tells people off for correcting him. And there's a very revealing scene where he and his cronies have dinner with some other people. It's not entire, they're members of another firm, another mob, and their associates, one of whom is played by Roger Lloyd Pack, the guy who played Trigger in Only Fools and Horses, playing a very un-Trigger-like character, a character who's actually kind of... The easiest way to describe him to you is that he's kind of like Will Self. So if you can imagine in this bizarre gangland Renaissance, northern European Rembrandt, with costumes by Jean-Paul Gaultier, by the way, that's the other thing. The visuals of this film are amazing. The visuals of the food are amazing. The visuals of the mise en scène, the other diners. I think one of the things about seeing this on the big screen was you really, rather than on video and DVD, which is what I've watched it on previously, is you get to see just how visually sumptuous and interesting the background extras are in the film. And again, that's that Greenaway-esque painterly thing, which almost kind of gives all the figures in a scene a kind of equality. You know, they're all equally represented, not in a very shallow way, but, you know, not in a box-ticking way. There's no concern with this, but just people look interesting. I got the feeling watching it that all the other people in the restaurant could just as easily have had their own story, which you don't always get with things. One of the only comparisons I can think, weirdly, is with Star Wars. One of the nice things about the good Star Wars films, the first three, the classics, is also one of the good things about The Force Awakens, and that is that there's lots of little extra sort of aliens and robots and things, or not to ridiculous degrees, and not all CGI, but there's just a lot of world building that goes on in the background just by having interesting looking characters, like that Wolfman guy, who I think has been edited out of some of the new versions. But anyway, yeah. Sorry if you have watched the edited George Lucas abominations where they get rid of the Wolfman character, whose name I can't remember because I'm not on Wikipedia all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But yeah. It's called Wikipedia. No, anyway, no, I used to be a massive Star Wars head. Now I just watch the films. Yeah, so visually the film is amazing. I've completely lost where I was going there, and I had this feeling that I was coming up to a really nice... Yes, yeah, okay. So, Roger Lloyd Pack's character, if you can imagine him as being like a sort of Will Self figure, commenting on everyone in the film, he describes them all as, washed up mobsters, busted boxers, bank robbers, gone to seed. It's a really withering sort of description. And again, one of the interesting things is Speaker takes this. He's not as strong as he's making himself out to be. He's someone trying to puff himself up because he's very, very weak, actually, and he's afraid that he's weak, and he's afraid that he's stupid, and he spends a lot of time trying to shore up his amour propre, his idea that he is a genius, because he has been... I think, in the case of Speaker, remember, harmed by people very close to him, with whom he has an ambivalent relationship. There's a figure in the film, Gracie, who is Albert's mother, and she's played with a kind of weird malevolence, a weird malevolent stupidity by Liz Smith, who played the Nan in the royal family and stuff like that, brilliant actress. And there's a kind of vacuousness and there is something grotesque about Gracie as a character as well. And I don't know if she's the character. I don't know what kind of trauma is in Speaker's past. But that's the good side of the grotesqueness of him. And the bad side is everything else. The bad side is the public face he turns to the world. The bad side is his bullying of people and his emotional overreactions, his sentimentality, his jealousy, his, again, this amour propre, this amazing, massive sense of undeserved pride, which ruins him. It really, it does ruin it. It ruins him because he gets sloppy in what he does, and an act that he takes at the very start of the film, involving 2 trucks full of rotting meat, which become very important to the plot, eventually leads to the restaurant being shut down, and eventually leads in some way to Speaker's undoing. And it's interesting to think about that person's undoing, being related to food and being related to rotten food and decay and putrescence and kind of horrible, icky stuff. The repressed contents of the unconscious, the Freudian return of the repressed, is almost dramatized in this film, where these two trucks of meat that Speaker brings with him at the beginning of the film as proof of his bounty are refused by the cook, who is an actual artist, who is a contrast to Speaker's character in the sense of being someone who's artistic, who has actual creativity, who has actual discernment, who has the qualities that Speaker doesn't, but who is subservient to him, who is the person cooking his meals, who is being extorted out of protection money by him. He's one of the things that Speaker takes pride in is the fact that he has someone like Richard working for him, but there's also a weird kind of resentment on his part. Albert knows that Richard is smarter than he is. And there's a sense that this really aggrieves him. But also because obviously he's the cook, he's the person that Speaker relies on for the food, and also for shoring up his ego with his idea that he is a gourmet. Even as Richard kind of clearly mocks this, and mocks this in a way that Speaker knows. But Speaker is pretty sure that none of his underlings can recognize it. He likes to think of himself as being on the same plane as Richard intellectually, when he clearly is not, despite the difference in their social status, and that rankles him. He's a character who's not productive. He only brings with him rotting meat that he's too stupid to discern won't be good for Richard's kitchen. He suggests many other things for the restaurant that don't work. There's a neon sign, there's gold-handled cutlery that he brings with him. You might think about Trump's introduction of gold drapes to the White House, because he likes gold. He likes to show off a lot of gaudy things, which are his opulence. And it's not for us. That's the thing. With a person like that, all that showing off isn't... It's not because they want to impress us, deep down. It's because they want to keep impressing themselves, because the minute they stop impressing themselves, the minute they stop feeling like they're the best and they're the greatest, the minute they realise that they're nothing, it's what Burroughs called a naked lunch moment. Thatcher, who Greenaway was kind of protesting with this film, had her naked lunch moment when she was turfed out by the Tory party. They have a long tradition of getting rid of their leaders. I have no doubt that that's going to happen to Theresa May at some point, maybe soon, maybe not, who knows. She had a naked lunch moment when she was betrayed by her own party. Trump will probably have a naked lunch moment of his own when he'll realise just what he's staring down the barrel of, and where he's gotten himself, and how he's overreached himself. And that's the thing that makes him grotesque as well. Because there's obviously all the ugliness of him as a person. But the thing that he has that's appealing is this lie that he tells very well, that he represents some version of the American dream. You know, he's the person that everyone said could never be president. Hey, he's president. You know, in a perverse way, he's a billionaire who's able to well, he's someone who claims to be a billionaire. My theory has always been that the reason he won't release his tax returns is because he actually has a lot less money than he tells us, and all that money that he does have comes from some very dodgy people. That's my theory. Which is a theory, which is mine. I'm not saying that's the truth. But, yeah. But he has this fake underdog appeal. And that's the side that's compelling. I think that was compelling to a lot of people was just basically the idea that he wasn't supposed to win, and that a lot of people that people thought had been being very smug got a bit of a kick in the teeth. And people wanted to see that happen. And you see that also with Brexit. But the thing is, that kick in the teeth can only go so far. Because as far as Brexit is concerned, maybe our naked lunch moment is when we have to think about reintroducing rationing. And you wonder about Trump. And you wonder about Albert in The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. And you think, he wears a red, white, and blue sash, and those aren't just American colours. Because I think, in a way, as much as you could say that Albert is Trump, there's also a depressing sense in which, at the minute in Britain, not in the person necessarily of any particular politician, though there are more who are responsible, there are some who are more responsible than others, but in a very real way, we're the wife. We are tyrannized right now by a cult of Albert speakers. And that's a depressing thought. And thoughts like that can be depressing, and they can be paralyzing. And that's why in the second of these videos that I'm going to be doing, we'll look again at the work of another filmmaker from the 80s who was trying to resist Thatcher and came up with an idea that I'm very interested in intellectually at the minute. Especially in the bounds of the fact that I'm making this as a video for something like YouTube,